Hello everyone, Caliber Whips here, and today this is the first installment of a brand new series called Whipmaker's Guide. Now for those of you who don't know what it is pretty much a series like the Basics On, and I also have a new series coming out called Fact or Fiction, which is also pretty neat. But anywho, Whipmaker's Guide is basically kind of like the Basics On, the only difference is it's your guys' questions. So if you guys have any questions that you would want to see in a Whipmaker's Guide video, go to the discussion page. Not the comments, you know why. Go to the discussion page. That's pretty much where you have access to all of the comments at once instead of hopping from video to video. So go over there to the discussion page where you guys can leave a compliment, ask a question, or chew me out over something stupid. Either one. Anywho, let's get started and answer questions sent in by Daniel. So the first question Daniel has is, how long do you make the core? And that is a great question, and that is a very paramount question in the sense that if you make the core too long, the taper of the whip will be horrible. Like you'll be like half the whip won't have any taper at all. And that was one thing that I really struggled with when I first started whip making, was getting a good core. And some of these questions are kind of aimed towards that. That's pretty much why the thumbnail looks the way it is. Anywho, how long do you make the core? So I'm going to give you guys a little illustration. Keep in mind I am not the best artist. As a matter of fact, here's a picture that I drew in January of 2016 actually. So January 21st, 2016. That's what I drew. So that'll give you guys a good idea of what you're in for. But anywho, so let's say you have the handle, and you want to know how long to make the core. So let's say this right here is the thong of the whip. Let's just say it's 6 feet. Does not include the handle. Okay. How would you figure out how long to extend the core? Well, that varies depending on what the whip has. So for example, let's say a standard bullwhip has an overlay, 2 plated bellies, and then the core. So for example, we have the core, first plated, second plated belly, and then the overlay. The core, we have 4 layers. The core makes up 1/4 of the total length of the whip is devoted to the core. There we go, just like that. Now let's say you have a whip that has an overlay, a 1 plated belly, and then a core. 3 layers, 1 core, boom, 1/3. Let's say you have an overlay, 3 plated bellies, and then the core. Well, 5 layers, 1 core, 1/5 the total length of the whip. Okay, so as you guys can tell, it is very easy to deduce. So if you have a 10-foot whip with 3 plated bellies, 1/5 of 10 is 2. You would have a 2-foot core. See what I'm saying? So that is pretty much a good rule of thumb. Now do keep in mind that is not the only way to do it. You can kind of subtract or add inches or feet, you know, depending on what you want, but that is pretty much what I would consider going by. That's what I currently do, and that's why my whips are so fabulous. Anywho, his next question is, how far do you weight the core? And again, that can vary depending on what the characteristics of the whip you want it to have. So for example, if you want a very fast and light whip, you would have a very short weighted core, you know, just a very little bit of BBs or shot load. If you want a very slow, very heavy bullwhip, you would weight it very far into the thong of the whip. So that can vary drastically. So if your guys are aiming for kind of like a classic indie, you know, very heavy lumbering, check out my Basics on Waxing whips. That whip over there is like lead loaded almost to the fall hitch. I mean, like almost, like for like 7 feet, it's like loaded with lead. So the whip, the 6-foot, the classic indie that I had in my waxing video is very heavy and has very, very slow, heavy characteristics. So it was basically weighted about 7 feet out of the 8 feet. So that kind of gives you guys an idea. Now for a very fast whip, you would want it very light load. So for example, you might want to weight it with like ball chain, just a short way. But anyways, you guys get the drift. Another question he had was, how long would you make the strand you shot load with BBs? And again, that varies depending on what you want. I kind of answered it a little bit in the last question, but for example, this is a 1 foot section of BBs. This would be used in a slightly lighter whip that would be used for fast and basically light and fast. And if you want a whip that is slow and heavy, obviously you make it longer. Here is a 4 foot section of BB paracord. And yes, that took almost 2 hours to make. But anywho, that kind of gives you guys another idea. Another question he had was, how do you attach the shot-loaded strand to the handle? And that is a very good question, and a dilemma that I first had when I first started. You can attach it two ways, I think. For example, if I were to attach this to a handle, this is a 3/8 inch steel nail. Now really quick, I got a bunch of backlash from a bunch of one-star whip makers saying, you know, why would you use a nail in a whip? Won't it spike through? And the answer is yes, it would, if you're a bad whip maker. Fortunately, I am not. I am a very good whip maker, so this right here has no issue whatsoever. Anywho, I would glue this and then kind of attach it like that. And then obviously I would finish prepping the core, and it would look very, very good. But I would glue it to the outside like that. That's one way you could attach it. Or, like for example, that's with paracord. Now if you have something called sinker cord, I know of a lot of whip makers that use this stuff. I occasionally use it myself. They would feed the sinker cord over the steel rod. This is 1/4 inch steel rod. They would feed it over it. And then they would kind of either glue it or kind of fasten it with like hockey tape. And then they would fill it up with BBs. That's one way you can do it, and completely okay. Now what's nice about 3/16 inch steel rod is that most paracord will fit over it. And that's pretty neat as well. What was the other question he had? Is the core just the shot-loaded strand, or does it have a short plated belly that is included in the core? And the answer, that's more of a upfront answer, and the answer is it doesn't really include a plated belly or any plating whatsoever, because if it did, it would be part of it would basically be a belly. I don't know why I coiled that up. Anyways, for example, if the core, you know, here's the handle, and the core extends 1/4 of, you know, your whip, you would not plate. If you were to do any plating, you would plate past the core, and that would then equal one belly. So, you know, if you made the core and then you plated and stopped somewhere up here, you're doing something wrong. I honestly don't know why you would do something like that. I think what you would be doing is like a backwards taper, and that's not very good. I don't know. Anywho, you would plate past the core, so technically no, there really is no plating in the core. And if there is, it's not enough to be classified as a belly. But yeah, those are his main questions that he had. Those are his 5 core related questions that he had. This video wasn't really like making cores, but it did have a lot of core making value to it. Another question he had though that didn't have much to do with cores at all was, how do you figure out how much paracord you need? And that's another good question, because when I build a whip for the first time, in the sense that when I basically create a new whip recipe, like I'm trying to remember one that I did, like the showcases, obviously like the Dark Jedi or the classic, the Galaxy, that's a good example. I made several versions of that whip before I came to the original Galaxy. What I did was I basically would get a general idea of what I needed, and I would cut everything very long. I would keep very copious notes and measurements, and then whenever I was ready to drop a strand, I would cut that and measure it. So for example, if I wanted, you know, to build a whip, you know, let's say I got to the 6-foot thong of the whip. Let's say the longest strand, including the handle, let's say the longest strand was 24 feet. To err on the safe side, for a 6-foot whip, I would subtract like 2 feet and go all the way down. Actually, no, I mean 3 feet. Yeah, I would subtract 3 feet all the way down for a 6-foot whip. If I were making like an 8-foot whip and the longest strand was say 32 feet, I would subtract 4 feet all the way down. And then any extra that I needed, any extra that I had, I would cut, measure, and then move on. If I were short a strand, then I would basically singe it together and then keep on plating. I rarely have ever done that, so keep that in mind. Don't worry, anyone who's bought a whip from me, because I am not a fan of doing that at all, because that connection can break, and the last thing you want is the paracord to unravel as you use the whip. So anyways, that's pretty much it for Whipmaker's Guide. I hope I answered all of the questions. Now obviously I answered Daniel's questions in advance before I did this, just so you know he had something. But I thought it would be nice to kind of breeze over those questions, because they are very important, and it would be very good if you know, new whip makers had this material. But if you guys have any questions that you would like to see in a Whipmaker's Guide video, go to the discussion page. Like I said, you can leave a comment, you can leave a compliment, ask a question, or leave your hate speech. Anyways, thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.